The man in the tailored suit leaned across the table close enough that Isabella could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath and said it slowly, like each word was a bullet he was loading into a gun. "Sweetheart, I don't think you understood what I said, so let me try again in simple words, since that's clearly what you need." The entire restaurant went quiet. Isabella's hand trembled around her notepad. Her jaw tightened. She had been working doubles for 6 straight days. She had not slept more than 4 hours. And this man, this stranger in a $3,000 jacket, had just spoken to her like she was furniture. She opened her mouth. And then the man at the corner table, the one she had nearly forgotten, was there, slowly set down his wine glass and smiled. Not at her, at the man in the suit. And that smile made everyone in the room go very, very still. If you are new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. Isabella Marino had a rule about men like him. She had developed the rule over years of waitressing in Manhattan, years of carrying plates of food to people who never once looked her in the eye, years of smiling through comments that were meant to diminish and remarks that were designed to remind her of exactly where she stood in the room. The rule was simple. You do not react. You breathe. You write down the order. You walk away. You let it go. She had broken that rule exactly once in her life at a diner in Queens when she was 19, and it had cost her that job and 2 weeks of rent. She had never broken it again. But that was before the night of the 17th of October in Trattoria Luna, when a man in a suit that cost more than her monthly income decided she was the perfect target for his frustration. It had started simply enough. Table 7, party of 3. 2 men and a woman, all of them in their 50s, all of them radiating the particular brand of wealth that does not advertise itself loudly, but is somehow louder than everything else in the room. The kind of wealth that knows it does not have to try. Isabella had approached the table with her professional smile, the one she had practiced so many times it no longer felt like pretending, and she had greeted them warmly and offered the specials. The woman had been perfectly pleasant. One of the men had barely acknowledged Isabella at all, which was fine, which was actually preferable. But the third man, the one in the charcoal suit with the gold cufflinks and the expression of someone who had never once in his life been told no, had looked at her like she was a problem he had not anticipated encountering. "You're the one covering this section tonight?" he had asked, and even the way he said it made it sound like a complaint. "Yes, sir, I'm Isabella. I'll be taking care of you this evening." He had made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like something halfway between dismissal and amusement. "We'll see about that," he said, and turned back to his companions. Isabella had written down their drinks, recited them back precisely, and walked away without reacting. Rule intact. Good. Fine. But then he had sent the wine back, not because it was wrong. She had brought the exact bottle he had pointed to on the menu. But he had sent it back anyway, and when she had politely confirmed the selection, he had looked at her with that flat, bored expression and said, "I pointed to the one above it. Are you sure you can read?" The woman at the table had shifted in her seat. The other man had looked elsewhere. Isabella had looked at the menu. He had pointed to the lower one. She was absolutely certain of it. But she had smiled and said she would bring the other bottle immediately because that was the rule and that was the job, and she needed this job. She brought the other bottle. He sent it back again. "This one's corked," he announced loudly, just loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. It was not corked. She could tell from here that it was not corked. She had been around wine long enough to know. But she said nothing and took the bottle and brought a third. When she set it on the table, he barely looked at it. He was in the middle of a conversation. He waved his hand at her, a dismissive little flick of the wrist, like she was a fly he was shooing away. She stood there for just a moment, long enough to feel the humiliation settle into her bones, and then she stepped back. She was halfway to the kitchen when she heard him say it. Not to her, to the woman beside him, but loudly enough that Isabella and the couple at table 8, and possibly the busboy near the window, could all hear it clearly. "I don't know why they keep hiring girls who can't follow basic instructions." Isabella stopped walking. She did not turn around. She stood with her back to table 7, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she pressed her notepad against her side so hard she could feel the spiral binding leave marks on her fingers. Walk away, write it down, let it go. She walked into the kitchen. Marco, the sous chef, looked up at her immediately. He had known her for 3 years. He could read her face. What happened? Nothing, she said. Isabella. I'm fine. She put in the order and turned around and pushed through the door back into the restaurant, and that was when she saw him. Table 12. Corner seat. Alone. She had not noticed him come in, which was unusual because Isabella noticed most things. She noticed which tables were about to turn over and which ones were going to linger for another hour. She noticed which guests needed water before they asked for it. She noticed small things that most people overlooked, and it was this noticing that had made her, despite everything, genuinely good at her job. But this man had somehow arrived without her registering it, and now he was there at table 12 with a glass of still water in front of him that she had not poured, and he was watching table 7 with an expression she could not immediately read. He was not eating. He had not ordered yet. He was simply sitting there with that water and that expression, wearing a dark jacket with no tie sleeves pushed back just far enough to show the edge of something dark on his forearm, the beginning of a tattoo she could not quite make out from here. He was perhaps 35, perhaps 40. Dark hair, dark eyes, jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something expensive and unyielding. Handsome in the way that good architecture is handsome, with a quiet authority to every angle. He was watching the man in the charcoal suit, not aggressively, not openly, but with the calm focus of someone who has decided to pay very close attention to something and who is in no hurry at all about it. Isabella crossed the floor toward him, pulling up her smile. Good evening. I'm so sorry I wasn't here when you were seated. Can I start you with something while you look at the menu? He turned his gaze from table 7 to her, and it was like stepping from a cold room into a warmer one. Something in his expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed. Acqua va bene, he said. Water is fine. Her step faltered, just slightly. She recovered immediately, professional as always, but something in her chest did a small, involuntary thing. His Italian was not tourist Italian. It was not the Italian of someone who had learned a few phrases to sound impressive at a restaurant. It was native easy, the Italian of someone who had grown up inside it. She answered him without thinking. In Italian. We have still and sparkling. Which do you prefer? He raised one eyebrow, just a fraction, and the corner of his mouth moved. Still is fine. Your accent is northern, he said, still in Italian. Milan, or somewhere closer to the lakes. My grandmother was from Lecco, she said, and then caught herself because she did not know why she was having this conversation, and she had tables to check on. I'll get you a menu. I know what I want, he said. He switched to English, but it was unhurried, unaccented English, as though he moved between languages the way most people move between rooms. Whatever the kitchen is proud of tonight. I'll ask, she said. Good. He picked up his water glass. And then quietly, without looking back at table 7, he pointed to the lower bottle. You were right. Isabella went completely still. She did not say anything. She could not think of a single thing to say that was safe, that was professional, that kept the rule intact and the job secure. So she just nodded once and walked away. At table 7, the man in the charcoal suit was explaining something to his companions with large, confident hand gestures. The woman was nodding along, though her eyes kept drifting to her own wine glass, with something that looked like relief that she did not have to be the one talking. The second man was checking his phone. Isabella brought them their first course. She did everything correctly. She smiled. She refilled the bread basket without being asked. She kept the water glasses full. She did every single thing the way it was supposed to be done. And then as she was setting down a plate of carpaccio in front of the woman, the man in the charcoal suit said it. Not a question this time, a declaration, loudly, to his companions, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced consequences. Sweetheart, I don't think you understood what I said. So let me try again in simple words, since that's clearly what you need. The table next to them went quiet. Isabella felt the heat rise up her neck. She had not misunderstood anything. She had done everything correctly. He was not talking about something she had done wrong. He was simply saying it to say it. He was saying it because he could, because she was standing there with a plate in her hand and a uniform on, and because in his world this was acceptable. Her hand was steady. The plate did not shake. Her face did not change. But inside her chest something cracked. Something that had been holding together through 6 double shifts and a pile of overdue bills and a dream she kept pushing further and further into the future cracked right down the middle, and she had to stand there and let it crack because that was the rule and that was the job. She set down the plate, she straightened, she opened her mouth, and from table 12, without raising his voice, without standing up, without doing anything dramatic at all, the man said, "I'm sorry, say that again?" The charcoal suit turned, everyone turned. Isabella turned, the man at table 12 was looking at the man at table 7 with the same calm, unhurried attention he had been paying since he arrived. He had his water glass in one hand. He had not moved from his seat, but something about the way he was looking at the man in the charcoal suit made the air in the room shift like the pressure dropping before a storm. "I said say that again," he repeated quietly, and then he set down his water glass. "To me." The man in the charcoal suit stared at him. "Excuse me, you were speaking to someone," the man said. "I want you to say it again, exactly as you said it, but say it to me." There was a pause that lasted 3 full seconds. Isabella counted them. The man in the charcoal suit laughed. It was a laugh designed to diffuse the situation by pretending there was no situation. "I don't know who you are, but this is a private—" "Matteo Romano," the man at table 12 said. "Just his name. Said the way you state a fact, not an introduction." The laughter stopped. The woman at table 7 looked at her companion. The other man, the one who had been checking his phone, put his phone down slowly. The charcoal suit's jaw moved. Something passed across his face that Isabella could not fully name, but that she recognized the shape of. It was the look of someone recalculating very quickly. "Mr. Romano," the man said, and his voice had changed entirely. "I didn't realize I wasn't—" "I know you weren't," Matteo Romano said. "That's the problem." He looked at Isabella then for just a moment, not with pity, with something that was harder to categorize. Something that said, "I see you standing there. I see that you are holding it together." "Continue," he said to her gently, and looked back at his menu. Isabella stood in the middle of the restaurant floor with her heart hammering and her face carefully still, and she thought what just happened. She finished the table service. She did not look at table 12 again for 20 minutes. The man in the charcoal suit did not say another word to her for the rest of the evening. When they left, the woman pressed a folded 50 into Isabella's hand and squeezed her fingers once quickly, like an apology she was not allowed to say out loud. The other man mumbled something about the food being excellent. The charcoal suit walked out without looking back. Isabella stood at the server station and unfolded the 50 and looked at it and thought about all the things she had wanted to say for the last 2 hours and hadn't. "Thank you." She turned. Matteo Romano was standing a few feet away, jacket settled perfectly on his shoulders, hands relaxed at his sides. He had that same quality of stillness she had noticed from across the room, the kind that was not passivity, but something more deliberate. "For what?" she asked. "For not throwing the carpaccio at him," he said. It was clearly a possibility. She almost laughed. She caught it in time and turned it into something more measured, but it was close. "I've had worse," she said. "I know," he said. And the simplicity of it, not, "I imagine so," or "I'm sorry." Just, "I know," caught her off guard. "Your food was good," she asked because she needed to say something professional. "Excellent. Marco does something with the branzino that I haven't been able to replicate anywhere." He paused. "Your Italian is better than you let on." "I wasn't hiding it." "You switched back to English very quickly." She looked at him. He looked back at her with those dark eyes that had the infuriating quality of appearing to notice everything. "It's easier," she said finally. "In this job, they have opinions. About Italians. About women who speak Italian and are also serving their food." He was quiet for a moment, then, "What's your name?" "Isabella." "Matteo," he said, as if she had not already heard it said out loud, like the name of a building in a city everyone knows. "Do you work here every night?" "Why?" "Because I'd like to come back, and I'd like to know if I should request this section." Something about the directness of it surprised her, though she was not sure why. He did not seem like the kind of man who was not direct. "Thursday through Sunday," she said, "and Friday lunch." "Good." He pulled his jacket straight, which was a purely unnecessary adjustment because it was already perfectly settled, and she suspected he did it simply to give his hands something to do. "Good evening, Isabella." "Good evening," she said, and he walked out. Marco appeared at her elbow from nowhere. "Who was that?" "I have no idea," she said, which was and was not true. She looked up the name on her phone during her break, sitting on the concrete step behind the kitchen with her feet aching and the October cold biting through her uniform jacket. She typed it in, and the results came back immediately, and she sat there reading them with the phone getting colder in her hand and her coffee getting cold in its cup. Matteo Romano, 41, Italian-American. Born in New York to a family whose name appeared in certain contexts in certain newspapers for certain reasons that were never spelled out clearly but were consistently implied. The Romano family. Old money, older reputation. Real estate imports, cultural foundations, and a list of business interests that stretched across 2 continents and was never fully enumerated. He had a foundation, the Romano Cultural Foundation. It funded preservation projects, language programs, heritage initiatives in the Italian-American community. There were photos of him at fundraisers, at ribbon cuttings, at formal dinners. In every single photo, he had that same quality of being the still point in the room while everything moved around him. There were other things, murmured things, rumors that were old and persistent and carefully never proven. The name Romano carried weight in this city in ways that had nothing to do with foundations and fundraisers. Isabella put her phone in her pocket and finished her coffee and went back inside. She told herself she would not think about him. She thought about him for the rest of the shift. He came back on Thursday. Same table, same corner seat, different jacket, this one slightly lighter with the same darkness at the forearms where the sleeves were pushed back. He was alone again. He ordered the branzino without looking at the menu and a glass of the Barolo that was third from the top, and he thanked her in Italian when she brought the bread. Grazie, just that, and he said it naturally, not for performance. They talked a little more that night. Small things, careful, things, the conversation of 2 people who are both paying more attention than they are showing. He asked about her other work because she had mentioned it in passing, and she told him about the translation work, the freelance contracts she picked up wherever she could, documents, mostly the occasional interpretation job, nothing steady enough to live on yet. "What languages?" he asked. "Italian, Spanish, some French. Italian is strongest." She refilled his water. "I'm working toward a certification." Toward, it takes time. It took money too, time and money she perpetually did not have enough of, but she did not say that part. He nodded slowly, turning his wine glass by the stem in that deliberate way he had, and said nothing further about it that evening. But she could tell he was filing it away. She did not know why she could tell. She just could. On Saturday, he brought a woman with him. Early 60s, beautiful in a fierce and unapologetic way, with silver hair and a ring on her right hand that caught the light like it was trying to start a fire. The woman looked at Isabella with sharp, evaluating eyes, and Isabella looked back calmly because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do with a woman like that was flinch. "This is Carla," Matteo said in the straightforward way he said everything. "My aunt." "Pleasure," Carla said in Italian with the vowels of Rome. "The pleasure is mine," Isabella said in Italian with the vowels of somewhere north of Milan. Carla's eyebrow went up. She glanced at Matteo. He was looking at his menu. Carla looked back at Isabella. "Lecco," she said. "My grandmother," Isabella confirmed. Something shifted in Carla's expression. Not warmth exactly, more like interest, like a door opening just slightly to let in a little more light. "Matteo says you're a translator." "I'm working toward it." "She's being modest," Matteo said without looking up from the menu. "She handles the table section single-handed on a Friday night and translates documents on her days off." "She is a translator. She just hasn't been paid enough for it yet." Isabella looked at him. He was still reading the menu as though he had not said anything worth discussing. As though the particular quality of seeing her clearly and saying it out loud was simply a normal conversational action and not something that had just disoriented her more than she would like to admit. "Tell me," Carla said, leaning forward slightly, "how do you feel about Italian-American heritage? Culturally, I mean. Preservation. The work of keeping something alive across generations." "I think it's important," Isabella said carefully. "I think language carries things that don't survive translation into other languages. The rhythm of it, the associations, the way certain words mean something that has no equivalent." Carla looked at Matteo again. This time he was looking back at her. Something passed between them, a conversation Isabella was not part of, conducted entirely in a glance. Sit for a moment, Carla said. I'm working, Isabella said. I know, Carla said. A moment. Matteo, tell the manager we need 2 minutes with your server. Isabella watched Matteo stand and cross the floor toward Franco, the floor manager, and watched Franco nod twice with the expression of someone who has already decided that whatever Matteo Romano wants is what is going to happen. And then she looked back at Carla, who was watching her with those sharp and entirely unreadable eyes. Sit, Carla said again. Isabella sat. We're building something, Carla said. Matteo and I, a cultural center. Italian-American, but done properly, not just pasta nights in red, white, and green bunting. Something real, a living place. Language classes, archival work events, programming that takes the heritage seriously. She paused. We need someone who understands both sides of it. Who lives in both worlds? Who can be the bridge? Isabella said nothing. She was listening very carefully. We need a translator and cultural coordinator, Carla continued. Someone fluent, someone who understands what's at stake when you translate not just words but meaning, someone who won't flatten it. She folded her hands on the table. Matteo noticed you. Matteo noticed I was being spoken to unkindly, Isabella said. Matteo noticed several things, Carla said. The other was simply the one you saw. Matteo returned to the table and sat down. He did not look at Isabella immediately. He straightened his napkin. You don't have to decide anything tonight, he said to the napkin, or possibly to the table, or possibly to her. I'd like you to come to my office, see the project. Ask whatever you want to ask, then decide. Isabella looked at him. He looked up then and met her eyes, and she had the unsettling and specific sensation of being seen completely by someone who has not yet decided what to do with what they are seeing. And if I say no, she asked, then you say no, he said simply, and I leave a good tip and come back next Thursday and we speak Italian about things that don't matter, and that's fine too. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back with that absolute stillness. The restaurant moved around them. Glasses clinked. Someone near the door laughed too loudly. The world did its regular things. What time? She said. Tuesday, 2 o'clock. He reached into his jacket and set a card on the table between them. Plain white. Just an address and a number. The building has a doorman. Tell him your name. She picked up the card. Enjoy your dinner, she said, and stood and put the card in her apron pocket and walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of it against her hip with every step. Marco was at the pass when she came through. He looked at her face. What happened? I have a meeting on Tuesday, she said. With who? She thought about how to answer that. She thought about the card in her pocket and the address on it and the man at table 12 with the dark eyes and the still quality and the name that everyone in a certain radius of this city recognized immediately. I don't entirely know yet, she said. Marco stared at her. Isabella. I know, she said. Do you... She picked up the next table's order from the push and balanced it on her arm. No, she said honestly, but I'm going to find out. The card sat on Isabella's kitchen counter for 3 days. She did not move it. She did not throw it away. She walked past it every morning while she made coffee, and every night when she came home, with her feet aching, and every single time she passed it, she told herself she was going to make a decision about it soon. Tuesday arrived before she had made one. She was dressed and out the door by 1:15, which was earlier than she needed to be, which was something she refused to examine too closely. She wore the gray blazer she saved for interviews and translation consultations, the one that made her look like someone who had already arrived somewhere even when she hadn't. She carried the card. She did not need to carry it because she had memorized the address, but she carried it anyway. The building was on the Upper West Side, not ostentatiously tall, not glass and steel aggressively announcing its own importance. Just a very good building that knew exactly what it was and didn't need to explain it to anyone. The kind of building that has worked there quietly and without apology for 50 years. The doorman said her name before she gave it. Ms. Marino, 22nd floor. Mr. Romano is expecting you. She stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close and breathed. The offices were not what she expected. She had expected something that looked like money performing itself, marble surfaces, and a receptionist who made you feel slightly inadequate. What she found instead was something closer to a working space. Books on actual shelves, maps on the walls, old ones, the kind with the Italian coastlines, and regional dialects marked in faded ink. A long table covered in documents, Photographs, printed pages annotated in two different handwritings. The kind of organized chaos that belongs to someone who is actually doing something, not someone who wants to appear to be doing something. Matteo was standing by the window with a phone at his ear when she was shown in. He held up one finger one moment and finished his call in Italian so fast she only caught every third word, something about a shipment, a date, someone named Ferretti, who was apparently not meeting a deadline to anyone's satisfaction. He hung up and turned and said, "You came." "I said I would." "People say things," he said with a slight lift at the corner of his mouth, that she was beginning to recognize as his version of a smile, which in most people would register as a full and obvious smile, but in him was carefully rationed. "I don't," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "I don't think you do." He gestured toward the table and she sat down across from him, and for the next 40 minutes he talked about the project with the kind of focus and detail that told her immediately that this was not a vanity exercise. This was not a rich man building a monument to himself in the form of a cultural center. This was something he had thought about for a long time and cared about in a way that was specific and informed, and she noticed personal. He talked about his grandmother, about the building in Carroll Gardens where she had lived for 60 years and spoken almost no English and never needed to because the neighborhood had been a world unto itself. About how that world had dissolved, not suddenly but slowly, the way ice dissolves first at the edges, then from the inside until one day you realize there is nothing left. About how the language had been the first thing to go, and how, when the language went, everything it carried went with it. The specific humor, the particular way of expressing grief, the words for things that had no English equivalent and now had no speaker either. "Lacrimosa," he said. "You know the word related to tears," Isabella said, "but it carries more weight than that. It's not just sadness, it's the kind of sadness, that is also beautiful, that recognizes something worth mourning." He looked at her steadily. "There's no English word for that." "No," she agreed. "That's what we're trying to preserve," he said. "Not the surface, the weight underneath." Isabella looked at the documents on the table, the photographs. A handwritten letter in Italian that appeared to be from the 1940s, the ink brown at the edges, the handwriting careful and slanted. What would my role be? Translation, primarily. Documentation. We have materials in Italian archival, some of it regional dialect, that need to be brought into English without being flattened. Interpretation at events. Liaison work with the Italian consulate and several cultural organizations. He paused. "It's not a minor role. I need someone who understands what they're handling. And you think that's me." "I've thought it since the second Thursday," he said. She looked up from the documents. "The second Thursday. The first time you came to the table and answered my Italian without thinking about it," he said. "Before you decided you should be more careful. You answered me the way you think, not the way you perform." That was enough. Isabella held very still. Something about being seen that precisely by someone she barely knew had a particular quality of discomfort, not the bad kind, but the kind that meant something real was happening. "What does it pay?" she asked, because she needed to ask it, because the practical questions were the ones that kept her feet on the ground. He named a figure. She kept her face still. It was more than she made in a month between both jobs. It was more than she had made in any month since she had arrived in this city with her grandmother's accent and her translation certificates and her very clear idea of what her life was supposed to look like before the cost of living had quietly dismantled it. "That's a full-time salary for a part-time start," he said. "We would scale as the project develops. There's also a benefit structure, but we can discuss that separately." "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why this amount? You could find a translator for less." "And I could find someone who translates words for less," he said. "I can't find someone who translates meaning for less. That's a different skill." She looked at him. He looked back. The room was very quiet. "I'd need to think about it," she said. "Of course. And I'd need to see a formal offer, in writing." Something in his expression shifted, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, like recalibration. "I'll have something drawn up by Thursday." "Good." She picked up her bag. "I'll let myself out." "Isabella." She turned at the door. "The woman at table 7, he said, "the one who pressed the 50 into your hand." She waited. Her name is Catherine Barone. Her husband is Marcus Barone, the man in the charcoal suit. He said it without inflection, which somehow made it more significant. He's not a guest I'd recommend encouraging. He's a guest of the restaurant, she said carefully. I don't choose the reservations. I know, Mateo said. I'm not suggesting you do anything. I'm suggesting you're aware. She looked at him across the room at that still deliberate quality he carried everywhere like a second jacket, and she thought about the name Romano and the things it implied in the careful way she had not let herself think about those implications since she read about them on her phone on the concrete step outside the kitchen. Aware of what specifically, she said, that Marcus Barone is the kind of man who remembers being embarrassed, Mateo said, and who looks for somewhere to put it. The air in the room changed slightly. She felt it. Are you warning me? She asked. I'm informing you, and he said, what you do with it is your own choice. She left without answering. The elevator doors closed. She rode down 22 floors with her hand flat against the wall behind her and her thoughts moving too fast to follow. And when she stepped out into the cold afternoon air, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed. Her phone rang. It was her friend and former college classmate, Sophia, who had the particular quality of calling at the worst possible moments with impeccable timing. How did it go? Sophia demanded before Isabella had said a word. You knew about the meeting. You told me about the meeting 3 days ago and then refused to talk about it. So, how did it go? Isabella started walking. It went. That's not information. He's offering me the coordinator role, full documentation, translation. The salary is... She stopped herself. It's real. Sophia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was her version of stunned silence. Then what's the problem? The name Romano. Another silence longer this time. Isabella. I know. You know what that name means? I know what people say it means. Those are not always different things. Isabella walked, her heels on the pavement, a taxi horn somewhere to her left, the particular specific noise of this city that she had learned to live inside of and sometimes still felt like a visitor to. He doesn't seem like... Isabella, careful. I know. Men who don't seem like anything are often exactly the thing they don't seem like. You sound like a fortune cookie. I sound like someone who loves you, Sophia said sharply. Be careful. That's all I'm saying. Be careful. Isabella put her phone in her pocket and kept walking and tried very hard not to think about the specific look on Mateo's face when he said the word lacrimosa, and whether it had been real or performed, and whether she was even capable at this point of telling the difference. She went to work that evening. Thursday shift. Full section. Mateo Romano was not at table 12. She noticed his absence the way you notice a missing sound, not dramatically, but as a small wrongness in the texture of the evening that she kept noticing and then telling herself not to notice. Table 7 had a new party. 4 women celebrating a birthday, warm and generous and easy. She liked them immediately. She brought them an extra round of something sweet on the house, and they thanked her with the enthusiasm of people for whom the evening was going exactly right. And she went home that night not thinking about anything in particular and slept for 6 uninterrupted hours, which was more than she usually managed. On Friday, there was a message on her phone, not from the number on the card. From a number she did not recognize with a Manhattan area code. It read, formal offer sent to the email address you provided on your translation portfolio site. Take your time. No pressure. She sat on the edge of her bed reading it at 7 in the morning with her coffee still brewing and thought he looked up my portfolio site. She opened her laptop and found the email. The offer was formal, detailed, fair in every particular. Responsibilities clear, timeline clear, compensation exactly as stated with room to renegotiate at 6 months. At the bottom, a line that read, the project needs someone who takes the language seriously. I believe that's you. Nothing else. She read it twice. She closed the laptop. She opened it again and read it a third time. Then she called Sophia. He found my portfolio, she said. Of course he did, Sophia said. Isabella, he's a man who finds things. That's literally what that family... Stop. Stop. Isabella put her hand over her eyes. Tell me what you actually think. Not the warning, what you actually think. Sophia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed softer, more honest. I think you've been surviving for 3 years. I think you are incredible at what you do, and the world has been handing you plates of food to carry instead of letting you do it. I think this could be real. A pause. I also think that getting close to the Romano family is not without risk. Both things are true. Both things are true, Isabella repeated slowly. Both things are true, Sophia confirmed. So the question is which one you can live with. Isabella thought about that for a long time after she hung up. She thought about it through her shower and her second cup of coffee and the 40-minute subway ride to the restaurant. She thought about it while she set up her section and filled the salt shakers and checked in with Marco about the specials. And then at 6:47 in the evening, Marcus Barone walked into Trattoria Luna. Not with the woman from before, not with the other man. Alone this time, and that was different. A man like that alone in a restaurant, where he had already been humiliated once, was a specific and deliberate choice. Franco seated him, which Franco had to do because he had a reservation. Isabella saw the name on the sheet when she checked it during setup, and felt something cold move through her, and she remembered what Matteo had said. The kind of man who remembers being embarrassed, who looks for somewhere to put it. He was not in her section. He was in Daniel's section, 2 rows over, and she thought, fine, let it be Daniel's problem. Daniel is 26 and blonde, and exactly the type that men like Barone treat with automatic respect. For 40 minutes it was fine. Then Daniel appeared at her elbow with the expression of someone who needs help and does not want to ask for it. He's asking for you specifically. She went still. Me. He said he wants his server from last week. I'm not. He told Franco he knows you personally. Daniel's voice was careful. He was not trying to put her in a difficult spot. He was simply telling her what was happening. Franco said, it's your call. She looked across the room at Marcus Barone sitting alone with a glass of water he hadn't touched yet, and the particular settled posture of someone who has already decided how the evening is going to go. She thought about the 50 in Catherine Barone's hand, the quick squeeze of fingers, the apology that wasn't allowed to be an apology. She thought about 6 years of the rule. Breathe, write it down, let it go. She straightened her apron. Tell Franco I'll take it. She crossed the restaurant floor with her notepad and her professional smile, and she said, Good evening, Mr. Barone. Welcome back. He looked at her the way a cat looks at something it has decided to play with. Isabella, he said, like they were old friends, like he owned the syllables. Sit down. I'm working, she said pleasantly. Can I start you with something tonight? I said sit down. And I said I'm working. She kept her voice perfectly even. Wine this evening. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite anger, more like interest, like she had done something unexpected. My wife told me about your little friend, he said, from last week. She waited. Her face gave nothing. Matteo Romano, he said, watching her face. You know who he is. He's a guest of the restaurant, she said. What would you like to drink? Barone leaned back. I'm going to order dinner, he said slowly, and you're going to bring it, and then I'm going to tell you something that I think would be useful for you to know. About your new friend. He smiled. Then you can decide what to do with it. She wrote down his drink order. She brought his drink. She put in his food order. She brought his bread without being asked because the rule was the rule and the job was the job. And then because Barone was that kind of man, he said it while she was refilling his water glass, quietly enough that only she could hear it. The Romano boy is being looked at, he said, federally. You mean, now it has been for 18 months. Whatever he's offering you, whatever this culture project is supposed to be, you might want to ask yourself why a man under federal investigation suddenly needs a translator and coordinator with no criminal record and clean professional credentials. Her hand on the water pitcher did not shake. She set the pitcher down. She looked at him, and for one single second, she allowed herself to look at him the way she actually felt without the professional mask, without the rule, without the practiced steadiness. She let him see that she understood exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it and exactly what she thought of it. Then she put the mask back on. I'll check on your food, she said. She walked into the kitchen and put her back against the wall next to the bread station and stayed there for 30 seconds. Marco passed with 2 plates and looked at her. Isabella. Give me a moment, she said. Take your moment, he said, and moved on. She stood there, and thought about the word federally and the word investigation and the 18 months and the particular calculated way Barone had delivered it, not like a warning from someone who cared what happened to her, but like a chess move from someone repositioning a piece. He was not warning her. He was trying to control her. He was trying to take something, the offer, the possibility, whatever it was that was sitting in her inbox, with its careful and precise language, and contaminate it. Make it impossible to touch without wondering. That was what he was doing. She was almost certain of it. Almost. She pulled out her phone. She stared at the screen. She thought about Sophia saying, "Both things are true." She thought about Matteo saying, "I'm informing you, not warning you." She thought about a handwritten letter from the 1940s with ink brown at the edges and the word lacrimosa and what it carried. She put the phone away and went back out and finished her service with the same even professional competence she had maintained through every difficult shift of the last 6 years. When Barone left, he left a tip that was exactly 15% calculated to the dollar. A deliberate mediocrity. His version of a small humiliation wrapped in the appearance of correctness. She looked at it. Then she took out her phone and typed a response to the email in her inbox. 2 words, "I accept." She hit send before she could reconsider. Then she put her phone in her apron, picked up the next table's check, and kept working. The response came at 11:53 that same night. While Isabella was still on the subway home, her feet aching and her mind doing the thing it always did after a significant decision, running back over it from every angle, looking for the exit she might have missed. Her phone lit up, 1 line, no greeting, no sign-off, just, "Good, Monday at 9, bring questions." She stared at it for the rest of the ride home. The subway rattled and swayed, and a man across from her fell asleep against the window, and a teenager 2 seats down was playing music through earbuds, loud enough that she could make out the bass line. And Isabella sat in the middle of all of it, with her phone in both hands, thinking about what she had just agreed to, and whether the feeling in her chest was excitement or terror, or the specific combination of both that she could never quite tell apart. She slept better than she expected. Monday arrived with a clarity that the weekend had not had. She was at the office at 8:55. The doorman, whose name she learned was Gerald, and who had the dignified bearing of someone who had seen everything and judged nothing, nodded at her like she already belonged there, which was either very welcoming or slightly unnerving. She decided to take it as welcoming. Carla was in the office when she arrived. This was not what she had expected. She had expected Matteo or an assistant, or possibly just the documents waiting for her on the long table with a note. She had not expected Carla already seated at the head of the table with a cup of espresso and a folder and the expression of someone who has been there for an hour and has formed opinions about everyone who will walk through the door. "You're early," Carla said. "You're earlier," Isabella said. Carla's mouth moved. It might have been a smile. "Sit. Matteo is on a call. He'll be done in 10 minutes or I'll end it for him." Isabella sat. She put her bag on the empty chair beside her and folded her hands on the table and looked at the folder. "That's yours," Carla said, gesturing at it. "First project, the Moretti letters." Isabella opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of handwritten letters, 47 of them. She counted, quickly dated between 1938 and 1962, all in Italian, all from a family named Moretti, who had emigrated from a small town outside Genoa to Brooklyn. The handwriting varied, some careful and formal, some hurried, some that began formally and gradually became more intimate over the years, the way correspondence does when it stops performing and starts simply speaking. She read the first paragraph of the first letter. Her throat tightened slightly. She did not let it show. "What's the intended use?" she asked. "The center's opening exhibition," Carla said. "We want to display them with translations, but not cold translations, not the kind that strips the voice out. The family has a granddaughter still living. She was 4 years old when the last letter was written, and she remembers nothing of the language, but she remembers her grandmother's hands." Carla paused. "She needs to be able to read what those hands wrote and feel that her grandmother is still in it." Isabella looked at the letters. "That's not translation," she said. "That's something harder." "Yes," Carla said. "That's why you're here and not someone else." Matteo came in 6 minutes later with his phone still in his hand and the particular contained energy of someone who has just finished a conversation that required a significant amount of patience. He saw Isabella in the open folder and something in his posture settled. Good, he said to both of them, or neither of them, or simply to the situation. You've started. She opened the folder, Carla said. Whether she started is another question. I've started, Isabella said. Matteo sat down. He put his phone face down on the table, which she was beginning to understand was his way of signaling that he was fully present, that whatever was in this room now had his complete attention. Questions, he said. You were told to bring them. The Moretti family, she said. What dialect? Ligurian. Heavily local, some words with no standard Italian equivalent. I'll need context documents. Regional vocabulary if anything exists. And I want to speak with the granddaughter before I finalize any translation. Matteo nodded. Arranged. I also want to be clear about what I'm not, Isabella said, and she felt both of them pay attention in a specific way. I'm a translator. I'm a cultural coordinator. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a researcher, and I'm not, she paused, choosing her words with care. I'm not involved in anything that isn't directly related to this project. The room was quiet for a moment. Carla looked at Matteo. Matteo looked at Isabella. Of course, he said, evenly. Without defensiveness, which she had half expected, in the absence of which she did not know what to do with. I want that in the contract, she said. It's already there, he said. Page 4, third paragraph. The scope of your role is defined and bounded explicitly. He reached across the table and turned the copy of her contract toward her and pointed to the paragraph without touching it. I had it written that way on purpose. She looked at the paragraph. He was right. It was there, clear and specific, the kind of language that a lawyer writes when they want no ambiguity. She did not say anything for a moment. Then why on purpose? Matteo looked at her steadily. Because you were going to ask, he said, and I didn't want the asking to be harder than it needed to be. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. He looked back without flinching. Carla picked up her espresso and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone pretending not to be listening very carefully. All right, Isabella said. She started on the Moretti letters that afternoon alone at the long table while Matteo worked from his desk across the room, and Carla came and went with the brisk, purposeful energy of someone running 3 things simultaneously. The office had its own rhythm. She found herself settling into it without meaning to, the way you settle into a temperature that is exactly right, not noticing it, until you realize you have stopped noticing it. The letters were beautiful. That was the thing she had not been fully prepared for. She had translated documents before legal documents, business correspondence, technical manuals, and she was good at it, and it paid what it paid, and it was work. But these letters were not work in that way. These were a woman writing to her sister in Genoa about the winter in Brooklyn, and how the cold came through the walls differently than the cold at home, and how her husband had learned 8 English words and was very proud of them, and how her youngest had started to dream in English, which frightened her in a way she could not name. Isabella sat with the 4th letter for almost 20 minutes, just reading it, not translating. Reading. You've stopped moving, Matteo said from across the room. He had not looked up from his work. I'm thinking, she said, about the dialect, about the woman who wrote it. She paused. She was afraid her children would lose themselves. In becoming American, they would lose the part that was her. Matteo was quiet. Then, without looking up, did they all? I don't know yet, Isabella said. That's what the letters will tell us. She heard him set his pen down. That's what the translation needs to carry, he said. That fear, not just the words. I know, she said. They worked in a quiet that was not uncomfortable for another 2 hours. At 4:30, Carla put on her coat and announced she had a dinner and left with the efficiency of a woman who allocates her time and does not apologize for it. The office became just the 2 of them and the documents and the fading afternoon light coming through the window. Isabella stretched her neck, which had been bent over the letters too long, and reached for her water glass and said, because the quiet had reached a point where saying something felt natural, Marcus Barone came into the restaurant Friday night. She felt the quality of Matteo's attention change before she looked at him. When she did, his face was composed, but his hand on the desk had gone still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. What did he say? Matteo asked. He said you're under federal investigation. She kept her voice even. Has been for 18 months was how he put it. Matteo looked at her without speaking for a moment. Then he said, and you accepted the offer anyway. I sent the acceptance before he finished his dinner, she said. But I'm telling you now because you should know he said it and because she stopped. Because you want to know if it's true, Mateo said. Yes. He turned his chair slightly, not facing her fully, not turned away. The angle of someone thinking about how to say something rather than whether to say it. My family's business has been under some form of federal scrutiny for the better part of my adult life, he said. That is not a secret. It is also not something I control. What I control is what I do. He paused. This project is what I do. The foundation is what I do. Whatever Barone told you is not about you. It's about him trying to reduce your options. I know that, she said. Then why are you telling me? Because I said I would be honest about what happens and what I know, she said. And because if there comes a moment when any of this touches what I'm doing here, I need to know, not from Barone, from you. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she held the eye contact and did not look away, which cost her something, but she did it. Fair, he said finally. I can agree to that. Good, she said. She went back to the letters. 3 weeks passed. The rhythm of them settled Monday through Thursday at the office Friday and Saturday at the restaurant Sundays her own, which she mostly spent on the couch with the Moretti letters spread around her because she could not stop thinking about them. She spoke with Elena Moretti, the granddaughter, a woman in her late 60s, who lived in a small apartment in Bay Ridge and cried twice during their conversation without apologizing for it, because she was that kind of woman, the kind who has decided that tears are not something to be ashamed of. Elena had her grandmother's hands, she said. She showed Isabella a photograph. Isabella looked at it for a long time. She was 2 weeks into the project when the first thing happened that she had not anticipated. She was in the break room, which was really just a narrow space with a coffee machine and a small table, when she overheard two voices in the hallway outside. Not Mateo, not Carla. Voices she did not recognize. Men's voices speaking Italian, and they were speaking quietly but not quietly enough. She was not trying to listen. She was making coffee. But her Italian was exactly as good as it needed to be to catch the words without searching for them. One of them said, Ferretti isn't going to wait past the 15th. The other one said, he doesn't have a choice. He says he does. Then Mateo will remind him he doesn't. A pause, the first voice again lower. And the woman, no, her hand stopped moving. What about her? Oh, she's here every way. Carla brought her in. Does she know what Ferretti is about? She's a translator. She does the letters. And that's all. That's all. She poured her coffee. Her hand was steady. She moved back to her desk and sat down and opened the folder for letter number 22 and read the same sentence 4 times before she understood it. That evening, she stayed later than usual. Not intentionally. She simply kept working until she looked up and realized Mateo was still there, and the office had gone quiet and it was past 7. You should go, he said. Almost done with this one. She finished the sentence she was on. Who is Ferretti? The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough to tell her something. A business contact, Mateo said. That's not what I asked, she said. She heard him turn in his chair. She did not look up from the letter. Where did you hear that name? In the hallway, she said. 2 weeks ago, I might not have been listening. Now I am. She set down her pen. I'm not asking for details. I'm asking if it's something I need to know about, in the context of what I agreed to. Mateo was quiet. She looked at him then. He had his elbows on his desk and his hands folded in front of his face, and he was looking at her over them with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the carefully rationed almost smile, not the composed attention, something more unguarded. No, he said finally, Ferretti has nothing to do with your work here, but he has something to do with yours. Yes, she nodded. She picked up her pen. All right, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost surprised. You told me the truth. You could have told me a different truth. She wrote down 3 words of the translation. I appreciate the difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, Isabella. She looked up. Be careful with how much you trust me, he said. I don't mean that the way it sounds. I mean that you should make your own judgments. Don't let me make them for you. It was the strangest warning she had ever received, a warning against the person giving it. She sat with it for the rest of the evening and all the way home on the train. The next day, Carla pulled her aside. Not gently. Carla did not do things gently, she did them efficiently and without apology. She drew Isabella into the side room and closed the door and said without preamble, "My nephew is going to complicate your life." Isabella blinked. "I'm sorry." "He's interested in you," Carla said with the directness of a woman who has decided that euphemism is a waste of everyone's time. Not in a passing way. Mateo does not do things in a passing way. He does not do anything in a passing way. If he's paying attention to something, he's decided to pay attention to it, and once he decides, he doesn't undecide. "We're working together," Isabella said carefully. "I know what you're doing," Carla said. "I also know what he's doing. They are not the same thing." She paused. "I'm not telling you to do anything differently. I'm telling you to know what you're walking into." "Does he know you're telling me this?" "God, no," Carla said. "He'd be furious." She said it with the comfortable certainty of someone who is not particularly afraid of fury from that direction. "I'm telling you because you're not a fool, and I don't want you to be caught off guard." "Why do you care?" Isabella asked. It was a real question, not a defensive one. She genuinely wanted to know. Carla looked at her for a moment. Something moved in the older woman's face, old in private and not fully displayed. "Because the last woman who got caught off guard by the Romano family's attention did not come out of it well," she said. "And because you have something real, the way you read those letters, the way you talk about what language carries." She straightened. "Don't let anyone turn that into something smaller than it is, including my nephew." She opened the door and walked out with the same brisk efficiency, and Isabella stood alone in the side room, for a moment feeling as though she had just been handed something she did not yet know how to hold. That Friday at the restaurant, she worked her section with the practiced competence of someone doing something in their sleep. Her mind was elsewhere. The letters, Carla's words. Mateo's voice saying, "Be careful with how much you trust me," as though he was already worried about something she had not yet done. At 9:45, she looked up from clearing table 8, and Mateo was at the door. Not at table 12, at the door. Standing with his coat on, not moving toward any table, looking across the restaurant floor directly at her. She crossed the room. "You didn't make a reservation," she said. "I'm not here to eat," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." She looked at him. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because I heard Barone booked a table for tonight," he said. "Under a different name. I found out an hour ago." Something cold moved through her. She glanced at Franco at the host stand. Table 11. A party of 2 under the name Carver. She had not looked closely at the man at table 11 because he was in Daniel's section and she had no reason to. She looked now. He was heavier than she remembered. Barone. He had done something to his appearance, cut his hair differently, but it was him, and he was looking back at her across the restaurant with the expression of someone who knew he had been caught and had decided it did not matter. "He's been here since 8, she said quietly. "I didn't recognize him." "I know," Mateo said. "That was the point." "What does he want?" Mateo looked past her at the table for a long moment. When he looked back, something had changed in his face. It was the same composure as always, but underneath it, she could see the bones of something harder. "He's sending a message," Mateo said, "to me through you." "What message?" "That he can reach the things I'm paying attention to." He said it flatly. "That's all this is. It's a positioning move." He paused. "Go back to your section. Don't look at him again. I'll handle this." "You're not going to do anything in my restaurant," she said quietly. He looked at her. For a brief moment, she thought she had miscalculated, pushed too far. Then the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, that rationed almost smile. "No," he said, "I'm not." He pulled out his phone. "There are other ways." He made one call standing at the door, quiet enough that she could not hear what he said. The call lasted 45 seconds. He put the phone away. At 9:52, 2 men in dark coats walked into Trattoria Luna, crossed directly to table 11, and said something quietly to Marcus Barone that no one else in the restaurant could hear. Barone's face went through 4 expressions in rapid succession. He put his napkin on the table. He stood up. He left without finishing his food, without paying his bill, and without looking in Isabella's direction once. The 2 men in dark coats left 30 seconds later. The restaurant continued as if nothing had happened. Isabella stood at the server station with her pen in her hand, And she thought about what Carla had said about the Romano family's attention and the woman who had not come out of it well. And she thought about Matteo at the door saying he can reach the things I'm paying attention to. And she thought about herself standing in the middle of all of it with the Moretti letters on her desk and Elena's grandmother's fear preserved in ink from 1941. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table and opened the folder she had brought with her. She read for 3 hours. She translated, by hand, in a notebook draft after draft, trying to find the version that held the woman's voice without flattening it. At 1 in the morning, she found the sentence she had been looking for since the beginning. The letter was from December 1943. The grandmother was writing about her daughter who had just turned 16 and had told her mother with the careless cruelty of adolescence that she was embarrassed by the way her mother spoke English. The grandmother had written, "I know she will forget. I am writing so that when she remembers, she will have something to find." Isabella read it 3 times. Then she wrote it in English, exactly as it was because there was no improving it, because some things do not need translation. They only need to be carried. She put down her pen and looked at the wall for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and typed, "I understand what you're building now. I mean that." She sent it to Matteo. 3 minutes later, "I know. Get some sleep." She almost laughed. She closed the folder. She turned off the light. She gave her notice at Trattoria Luna on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the night Barone walked out without finishing his food. Franco took it better than she expected. He was a practical man, Franco, and he had watched her section for 3 years with the appreciation of someone who knows exactly what a good server costs to replace. He asked if there was anything he could do to change her mind. She said no and thanked him, and he nodded and shook her hand and told her the door was open if she ever needed it, and she believed him, which was why leaving felt like something real and not just a formality. Marco, on the other hand, did not take it well. He found her in the break room during her last shift Saturday night an hour before closing, and he stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his expression doing the thing it always did when he was trying to be reasonable about something he was not entirely reasonable about. "Tell me this is the right thing," he said. "I think it is," she said. "You think?" "Marco, you're walking into something you don't fully understand," he said. "I'm not saying the project isn't real. I'm sure it's real, but the man behind it, I know what people say about the man behind it. People say it because it's documented," he said, and his voice had an edge to it that was not usual for him. Not anger, concern that had sharpened itself into something that could cut. "I looked him up, Isabella. The Romano family doesn't do things halfway. They don't do things partway. When they invest in something, they invest completely, and that means the thing they've invested in becomes part of their world, not the other way around." She looked at him. She had known Marco for 3 years longer than almost anyone else in this city. He had covered for her twice when she came in exhausted beyond function. He had let her eat in the kitchen on the night she forgot to bring food and couldn't afford to buy it. He was not a man who spoke out of anything but genuine feeling. "I know what you're saying," she said. "Then say it back to me," he said. "You're saying I might go in thinking I'm just translating letters and come out the other side being something else?" "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I'm saying." She thought about that. She thought about Carla's hands folded on the table, about the 2 men in dark coats, about the way Matteo had said he can reach the things I'm paying attention to with that flat factual tone that made it simultaneously reassuring and frightening. "I hear you," she said, "but you're going anyway." "I'm going anyway." Marco unfolded his arms. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has said what they needed to say and has accepted that it didn't change the outcome. Then he pulled her into a hug, which surprised her because Marco was not generally a hugger, and she held on for a moment because she needed it. "You call me," he said into the top of her head, "if anything goes sideways. You call me first." "I will," she said. She finished her last shift at Trattoria Luna at 11:47 on a Saturday night, pocketed her final tips changed out of her uniform for the last time, and walked out into the October cold. The city was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous and endlessly in motion. She stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds and breathed it in. Then she went home and went to sleep. Monday brought something she had not anticipated, which was that working full-time at the Romano Foundation felt substantially different from working there part-time. The difference was not unpleasant. It was simply more present, more complete. She arrived at 9 and the day had its own logic, its own demands, its own rhythm that moved faster than the restaurants and required different parts of her. She was thinking in Italian and English simultaneously for hours at a stretch, which was something she had always been able to do, but had rarely been asked to sustain for that long. The Moretti letters were nearly finished. She had completed 39 of 47, and the remaining 8 were the ones from 1958 to 1962. The later years when the grandmother's handwriting had begun to change with age and the dialect had shifted, mixing in words that were neither fully Italian nor fully English, but something in between, the hybrid language of someone living between two worlds writing from the seam. Elena Moretti came in on the Tuesday of Isabella's first full week. She was a compact woman with good posture and tired eyes, and her grandmother's hands, exactly as she had said, on the phone, broad-palmed and capable-looking. She sat across from Isabella at the long table, and Isabella spread out the translated letters before her, and Elena picked up the first one and read in silence. She did not cry this time. She was very still, the way someone is still when they are holding something too carefully to move. She read for 20 minutes without speaking, and Isabella sat across from her and said nothing and let the silence be what it needed to be. Then Elena looked up and said in English, with the Brooklyn vowels of a woman who had grown up on the other side of the translation her grandmother feared, she sounds like herself. Isabella felt something release in her chest. "Good," she said. "How did you do that?" Elena asked. "The other translations I've seen of things like this, they're correct, but they sound like nobody, like the person was taken out of it." She looked back at the letter. "She's in here." "She was already in there," Isabella said. "I just tried not to cover her up." Elena looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once slowly with a finality that was not dismissal, but the opposite, the recognition of something that has been waiting a long time to be recognized. Matteo was watching from across the room. She could tell without looking. She could tell by the quality of the silence on his side of the office, which was different from working silence. When he was working, he had a specific, focused energy she had learned to recognize. This was something else. This was attention being paid to her the way she had first paid attention to the letters carefully, without rushing, without wanting to disturb whatever was happening. She did not look at him until Elena had gone. When she did, he said simply, "That was the whole project in that room." "I know," she said. He stood and crossed to the table, which he did not usually do when she was working. He stood on the other side of it and looked at the spread of translated letters and the originals beside them, her handwriting next to his grandmother's handwriting, and he was quiet for a moment. "My father doesn't believe in it," he said. It was not something he had said before, not the careful explanations of mission and heritage he had given her in the early meetings. This was something else, more unguarded. He thinks preservation is nostalgia, that you look backward because you can't face forward. She waited. "He's wrong," Matteo said. "But it's harder to argue with him than it sounds because his version of moving forward did produce results." Something in his voice was careful and contained in the way of someone managing old feeling. He built something from nothing or close to it, and he's not wrong that looking back can be an excuse for standing still. "Looking back is only an excuse if you're not also moving," Isabella said. "These letters aren't about standing still. They're about knowing what you're carrying, so you don't drop it by accident." Matteo looked at her. That unguarded thing was still in his face. "You should tell him that," he said. "I'm telling you," she said. Something shifted between them. It had been shifting for weeks, she knew, in small increments, the way weather shifts before anyone names it. But this was the first time she felt it as a specific and named thing, rather than a general atmospheric condition. This was the first time the shift was too close to ignore. She picked up the next letter. "I need to get back to work," she said. "I know," he said, and went back to his desk. But the shift stayed. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, Carla came in with a man Isabella had not seen before. He was perhaps 65, well-dressed in the way of someone who has been well-dressed for long enough that it no longer requires effort, with silver at his temples and dark eyes that were Matteo's eyes in an older face. He stood in the doorway of the office and surveyed the room with a particular quality of ownership, not aggressive, not announcing itself, simply present the way a fact is present. Isabella knew who he was before anyone said it. Matteo stood when he came in. not deferentially, but with the specific posture of a man who respects and is frustrated by the same person in the same motion. "You didn't call," he said. "I was in the building," his father said in Italian. "Carla said you were here." Carla, who was behind him, said nothing and looked at the ceiling with the practiced expression of a woman who has been starting fires and then watching them for 50 years. "Papa," Matteo said, and in the single word there was a whole conversation Isabella was not part of. "This isn't a good time. It's a fine time." Vincenzo Romano walked into the room and looked at the table at the letters at Isabella's notes spread across it. Then he looked at Isabella. "You're the translator," he said. "Isabella Marino," she said in Italian. She stood. She offered her hand. He shook it, which was not dismissive, which was something. "Marino," he said. "From where?" "New York. My grandmother was from Lecco." Something moved in his face. "Lecco. I had a business contact from Lecco. Good people." He looked at the letters. "These are the Moretti materials." "Yes." He picked up one of the originals, which made her want to ask him to put it down, because they were archival and should be handled with gloves, but she did not say it because she was reading the room. He held it like something he had seen before. "What does it say?" he asked. "It's from 1941, she said. "She's writing to her sister about the winter and about her youngest son, who has started playing baseball with the neighborhood boys and comes home speaking English so fast she can't follow it. She says she's proud of him, and also," Isabella paused, "also that pride and grief are the same thing sometimes, when what you're proud of is the distance between what your child is becoming and what you were." Vincenzo Romano stood holding the letter for a long moment. His face was perfectly still. She could not read it. She was good at reading faces, and she could not read his. He set the letter down with more care than he had picked it up. "Pride and grief are the same thing," and he repeated in Italian. Flatly, factually. "Sometimes," she said. He looked at Matteo, another one of those conversations conducted entirely in a look too fast and too private for her to follow. Then he looked back at Isabella. "You'll be at the opening event." "That's my understanding," she said. "Good," he said, and that was all he said about it. He turned to Matteo, and then the conversation became the other kind, the kind about logistics and a property issue and someone named Ferretti again. And Isabella sat back down and picked up her pen and went back to work, and underneath the returning work, she was aware of the particular shape of what had just happened, which was that Vincenzo Romano had come into his son's project uninvited and walked out with a slightly different face than he had walked in with. She did not know what that meant yet, but she filed it. Friday brought the first real crisis. She was on the phone with the director of the Italian consulate's cultural office, a woman named Dr. Ferrara, who had been efficient and pleasant in all their previous communications, and who was now suddenly and without obvious explanation expressing reservations about the Foundation's partnership on the opening exhibition. "We have some concerns," Dr. Ferrara said carefully, "about the Foundation's current position." "What position?" Isabella asked. A pause. The kind of pause that means someone is choosing words very carefully. "There have been some inquiries from outside parties about the Foundation's associations. We have to be sensitive to our official standing, as you understand." Isabella's hand tightened on the phone. "Dr. Ferrara, the Romano Foundation's cultural work is entirely legitimate. I can send you documentation." "I'm sure it is," Dr. Ferrara said. "But our office is receiving pressure from a direction we can't easily dismiss, and until things are clearer, we may need to pause our formal involvement." "What direction?" Isabella asked. "Can you tell me that much?" Another pause. "I really can't," Dr. Ferrara said. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I'll be in touch." The line went dead. Isabella set the phone down and sat with the specific quality of what had just happened, which was that someone had called the Italian consulate about the Romano Foundation and had done it recently, and with enough weight to make a senior cultural official suddenly cautious. That was not an accident. That was deliberate. And the list of people with both the motivation and the connections to do it was not long. She found Matteo in the side conference room with two men she had seen before and not been introduced to. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. She said, "When you have a moment," and went back to her desk. He came out 4 minutes later. He sat across from her at the table, and she told him what Dr. Ferrara had said precisely without editorializing. He listened without moving. When she finished, he said, How long ago? 20 minutes. He pulled out his phone and stood in one motion. I'll handle it. I know you can handle it, she said. I'm telling you because it's my working relationship and because she stopped herself. He looked at her. Because I think it's baroni, she said. And if it's baroni, then this is about more than a restaurant and a 45-second phone call. This is escalating. Matteo stood with the phone in his hand and looked at her with the expression she was beginning to understand as the real one, not the composed public face, not the almost smile, but the face underneath both of those, which was simply a person thinking about something that mattered. Yes, he said, it probably is Barone. Why, she asked. What does he want? He wants to embarrass my father, Matteo said. He wants to make the foundation fail publicly. The cultural work, the legitimacy we've built, that's what my father uses to argue that the family name means something beyond what it's assumed to mean. If the foundation collapses, the argument collapses, he paused. And he knows that this project specifically matters to me. So I'm collateral, she said, not bitterly, as a fact. No, he said with a force that surprised her. You are not collateral. If that's what this has become for you, tell me now. She looked at him. His jaw was tight. He was looking at her with something that was past the careful composure and past the deliberate attention and past every quality she had cataloged over the weeks of working beside him. He was just looking at her plain and undefended, and she understood in that moment what Carla had meant when she said Matteo does not do things in a passing way. It hasn't become that, she said. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said, but I need you to fix the consulate because the exhibition matters, and I am not going to let Marcus Barone take Elena Moretti's grandmother's letters away from her. Something moved in Matteo's face that she could only describe as relief, fast and then gone, covered by the composure before she could fully name it. I'll have it resolved by end of day, he said. Good, she said. He did. She did not ask how. By 4:30, Dr. Ferrara called back and was warm and apologetic and confirmed the consulate's full partnership with the foundation, and the briskness of the reversal told Isabella something about the weight Matteo Romano could move when he decided to move it, which was both reassuring and something she filed in the same drawer as all the other things she was not ready to fully examine. That evening, she was still at the office at 6:45, which had become her usual time to leave when Matteo came and stood beside her desk. Not across from her. Beside her. It was the first time he had stood that close without the table between them. Come to dinner, he said. She looked up, as in, I know a place that does the Ligurian branzino better than Marco's version, and I think you should eat something before you read another letter tonight, he said. And as in, I want to talk to you outside of this office for 1 hour without it being about the project. She looked at him for a long moment. The specific, honest look of two people being clear about what they are doing. 1 hour, she said. 1 hour, he agreed. And then they went to a small restaurant 8 blocks away that did not take reservations and had no visible sign and seated them without any ceremony in the back corner. And she understood from the way the owner greeted Matteo that this was a place he had been going to for a long time. The owner was a Ligurian man in his 70s who spoke to Matteo in a dialect so specific Isabella could only follow parts of it, and she leaned in without meaning to parsing the unfamiliar words. And Matteo glanced at her and said quietly, Later, I'll tell you what he said. I caught most of it, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Your Italian is very clean, she said. His is not. But I grew up listening to my grandmother talk to her old friends, and they mixed it the same way. She paused. He said you look tired. He said he worries about you. Matteo looked at her. You got all of that. And you told him you're fine, which he didn't believe. Something in his face did something complicated and then resolved. No, he said. He didn't. They ate. They talked about things that were not the project about her grandmother, about what it felt like to grow up carrying a language that the world around you did not speak, about the specific loneliness of being bilingual in a context where only one of your languages was visible. She told him things she had not said to many people. She told him about the feeling of translating a document and hitting a word that had no equivalent and having to choose, and how the choosing always felt like a small loss. You lose a piece of the original every time, she said. The best you can do is lose the right piece, the one that the reader can live without. He was quiet for a moment. Then that's not just translation. No, she said, it's not. He looked at her with that plain, undefended look, the one that was past all the composure. Isabella. Don't, she said. I haven't said anything. I know what you were going to say. Do you? Yes, she said, and I need more time. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once and picked up his glass and changed the subject with the ease of someone who has accepted the terms and has no intention of violating them. The hours stretched to 2. She did not track the time. She only noticed when the restaurant had emptied around them and the owner was cleaning the last tables at the far end with the unhurried patience of a man who has no intention of rushing anyone. She noticed something else too, that for the first time in as long as she could remember, she had not once thought about the rent. She had not once calculated the distance between where she was and where she was supposed to be going. She had simply been in the room in the conversation in the moment without the permanent background noise of survival doing its constant arithmetic. She noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped, by the quality of the quiet where it used to be. They walked out into the night, and the city was doing its usual thing, enormous and indifferent and alive. And they stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and she thought about all the things she was not saying and all the things he was not saying, and the specific charged quality of the space between two people who are being careful with each other. Thank you for dinner, she said. Thank you for the translation, he said. And it was not entirely clear what he meant by that which she suspected was deliberate. She turned and started walking toward the subway, and she had gone perhaps 15 feet when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something stopped her. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, controlled, precise, with the tone of someone who is accustomed to delivering information without emotion. Miss Marino, my name is Agent Connors. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'd like to arrange a time to speak with you at your convenience. It concerns the Romano Foundation and your recent employment there. Isabella stopped walking. The city moved around her. Behind her, she heard Matteo's footsteps stop too. She did not turn around. Miss Marino, the agent said, are you available to come in? She stood there in the cold with the phone at her ear and the weight of every choice she had made in the last 6 weeks pressing down on her from above, and the weight of the letter from 1943 pressing up from below. And she thought about a woman in Brooklyn writing so that when she remembers, she will have something to find. Yes, she said into the phone. I'm available. She hung up. She stood still for 1 more second. Then she turned around. Matteo was 10 feet behind her, reading her face with the attention of someone who has already understood. His expression had the bones of the harder thing underneath, but he did not try to manage it. He did not reach for his phone. He simply stood in the cold and waited for her to speak. The FBI wants to talk to me, she said. He held her gaze. I know, he said quietly. Something dropped through her chest. You knew this was coming. I knew it was possible, he said. I hoped it wasn't. I should have told you. The street was quiet. She looked at him for a long time. All the things Carla had said, all the things Sophia had said, all the things Marco had said in the break room on her last shift. All of them arranged themselves in a row and looked back at her with the patience of truths that had been waiting for exactly this moment. What haven't you told me? She said. He looked at her with that plain face, the one without armor. And for the first time, what she saw in it was not composure or carefully rationed feeling. It was the face of someone who is about to tell the truth and already knows it is going to cost him something. Sit down somewhere with me, he said. All of it, right now. She looked at him. Her heart was hammering. Her face was still. All of it, she confirmed. All of it, he said. She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she turned and walked back toward the restaurant they had just left. And after a moment, she heard his steps behind her, steady and close, and she pushed open the door. The owner did not ask why they had come back. He simply set down his cloth and brought 2 espressos without being asked and disappeared into the kitchen with the discretion of a man who has learned over a long life that some conversations require privacy and coffee in equal measure. Matteo sat across from her and put both hands flat on the table and began. He did not start with the FBI. He started further back, which she understood was the right place to start because the FBI was only a symptom and she needed to understand the disease. He talked about his father, about the business Vincenzo Romano had built from a produce import operation in the 1970s into something that by the 1990s had fingers in real estate shipping, private contracting, and a dozen other things that were legitimate and a handful that were not. He talked about this with the careful, specific language of someone who has long since separated his feelings about it from his understanding of it, the way a doctor talks about a diagnosis. Not without feeling, but with feeling that has been organized into something functional. I didn't run from it, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who built a clean life by pretending the other one didn't exist. I know what my family is. I know what it's been. He looked at his espresso. What I decided when I was about 30 was that I was going to build something that was genuinely what it said it was. Not a front, not a cover, a real thing. The foundation, she said. The foundation, he confirmed. And for 8 years, it's been exactly that. Real work, real impact. No money laundering, no favors exchanged, no one using it for anything other than what it's supposed to be. He looked up. I want you to know that. Whatever you decide to do with the rest of what I'm going to tell you, I need you to know that first. She looked at him steadily. Keep going. Ferretti, Tabema, he said. She had heard the name 3 times now. She waited. Luca Ferretti is a business contact of my father's. Old relationship. The kind of relationship my father's world runs on history obligation and understanding that favors accumulate and eventually come due. Matteo's hands were still flat on the table. She noticed he was pressing them down slightly, a grounding gesture. Ferretti has been moving money, not through the foundation, through other channels my father is connected to. The federal investigation is about Ferretti, not about me, not about the foundation directly. But my name is adjacent to my father's name, and my father's name is adjacent to Ferretti's operation, and in a federal investigation, adjacent is close enough to examine. How long have you known they were looking at you at 14 months? She let that number sit for a moment. 14 months. He had known for 14 months. He had started the foundation's expansion 9 months ago. He had hired her 6 weeks ago. The arithmetic of it assembled itself quietly. You hired me knowing this was coming, she said. I hired you because you were the right person for the work, he said, and his voice had an edge to it now, not defensive, but insistent. Those are not competing facts. Both are true. Carla knew. Carla knows everything, he said. She also believed, as I believe, that the foundation's work is clean and would be seen to be clean, that any examination would find exactly what it is. I was not trying to use you as a shield, Isabella, if that's what you're thinking. I'm not thinking that, she said. I'm thinking you should have betrayed me. Yes, he said, simply, without argument. I should have. The espresso was getting cold. She picked it up anyway and drank it and set it down and thought about Agent Connor's voice on the phone. Controlled and precise. My name is Agent Connors, the FBI. What do they want from me? She said. They want to know what the foundation does, he said. Specifically, whether you have observed anything that doesn't fit the stated mission. Whether any materials you've handled are inconsistent with cultural work. He paused. They want a credible witness who came in from outside, who has no family history with the Romano name, who would have no reason to protect it. So I'm useful to them, she said. You're useful to everyone in this situation, he said, and the honesty of it landed without apology. That's the truth. Barone wants to use you to destabilize the project. The FBI wants to use you to build their case or clear the foundation. My father is deciding whether you're an asset or a liability. And he stopped. And you, she said. He looked at her, that plain face, that undefended look she had come to understand was the rarest thing he offered. I don't want to use you for anything, he said. I want you to do the work you are brilliant at in a project that deserves you, and I want, he paused again longer this time, the pause of someone choosing with care. I want you to still be here when this is over. That's what I want. The restaurant was entirely silent. The owner was invisible. The city outside did its indifferent, enormous thing, and inside this small room, it was just the two of them and the cold espresso and the truth, which was large and complicated and not entirely clean, but was, she believed, the actual truth. She believed him. That was the thing she had to sit with, not whether he was perfect, Not whether the Romano name carried things she would have preferred it didn't, but whether the specific things he had just said to her were true. And she believed they were. She believed it the way she believed in the Moretti letters, not because it was simple, but because she could feel the weight under the words. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right. I'm going to meet with Agent Connors," she said. "I'm going to answer her questions honestly. About the Foundation's work, about the letters, about everything I've seen in that office for the past 6 weeks. Because that is what I'm going to do." She held his gaze. "And it's going to be fine. Because what I've seen in that office is exactly what you said it was." Something moved in his face that she had never seen there before. It was relief, but it was more than relief. It was the specific quality of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just felt another person take part of the weight. He did not say anything. He just nodded. "But Matteo," she said. "Yes. The next time there is something I should know, you tell me, before it arrives on my phone from a federal agent. That is not negotiable." "Agreed," he said. She stood up. He stood when she did. They were on the same side of the table suddenly, or close to it, and the space between them was different from what it had been an hour ago. Not smaller exactly, but cleared of something that had been in it. "Go home," she said. "I'll see you Monday." "Isabella." She had already turned toward the door. She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back inside." She did not answer that. She walked out into the cold and the night and the city, and she called Sophia from the sidewalk because she needed to hear a voice that was entirely uncomplicatedly on her side. Sophia answered on the second ring. "You sound either very good or very bad," she said immediately. "Which is it?" "Both," Isabella said. "I'll explain in the morning." "Are you safe?" "Yes," she said, and Min nodded. "Then I'll make coffee," Sophia said. "Come at 9. She slept. She did not expect to, but she did the deep and dreamless sleep of someone who has made a hard decision and has stopped fighting it. Agent Connors was not what she had expected. She was perhaps 45 with the kind of face that gave nothing away by habit rather than effort, and she met Isabella not at a field office but at a coffee shop in Midtown, which told Isabella something about the nature of the conversation they were about to have. This was not an interrogation. This was a preliminary contact, a weighing. "Thank you for coming in," Connor said. "Of course," Isabella said. "I want to be clear about something before we start," Connor said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. "You're not a target. You're not a subject. You're a potential witness, and speaking with us is entirely voluntary." "I understand," Isabella said. "What can you tell me about the day-to-day operations of the Romano Foundation?" And Isabella told her. She told her everything she had actually seen and done. The Moretti letters, Elena Moretti's face when she read her grandmother's words, the archival materials, the documentation, the consulate partnership, the programming plans for the cultural center. She described it the way she had translated it, not covering anything up, not performing anything, just carrying what was actually there. Connors listened. She took notes. She asked specific questions about financial transactions, and Isabella said honestly that she had no visibility into the foundation's finances and had never been asked to handle anything that was not directly cultural in nature. She said this without apology and without defensiveness. "Has Matteo Romano ever asked you to do anything that felt inconsistent with the Foundation's stated mission?" Connors asked. Isabella thought about it, genuinely thought about it, because that was the question that deserved a real answer. She thought about every conversation, every document, every evening in the office. "No," she said, "he hasn't." Connors looked at her for a moment. "You understand that the Romano family has a significant history." "I understand what people say about the Romano family," Isabella said. "And I understand the difference between a family's history and a specific person's actions. I've been working with Matteo Romano for 6 weeks, and I can only speak to what I've observed in that time." "And what have you observed?" "A man building something real," she said. "Whether that surprises you or not, that's what I've seen." Connors made a note. She asked 3 more questions, all of them specific and answerable, and Isabella answered them all with the same precision. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. At the end, Connors gave her a card and told her she might be in touch again and thanked her for her time. Isabella walked out of that coffee shop and stood on the Midtown sidewalk and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not anxiety, not the relief of something finished, something cleaner than either of those. the specific satisfaction of having been asked a hard thing and having told the truth. She called Matteo on her way to the office. He picked up on the first ring. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "She's thorough." "I know," he said. "Are you all right?" "I told her the truth," Isabella said. "All of it. Everything I've seen." A pause, then, "I know you did. You're not worried." "Why would I be worried?" he said. "The truth is what it is." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll be in by 10, she said. "I'll have coffee ready," he said, and hung up. The following 2 weeks moved fast. The Moretti letter translations were completed and delivered. Elena came in to see the final versions and brought her daughter, a woman in her 40s, who had never heard her great-grandmother's voice, and sat at the long table reading for 45 minutes while the room held its breath around her. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, and she said in English, "I didn't know she was funny." And something in Isabella's chest cracked open in the best possible way. The opening exhibition was scheduled for the second Saturday of November. The planning moved into its final phase, and Isabella found herself at the center of it in a way she had not fully anticipated, not just translating, but shaping, advising, making decisions about how the materials were presented, which voices led, which stories anchored the room. Matteo gave her latitude she had not been given before, and she used all of it. Vincenzo Romano came in one more time 4 days before the opening. He came alone this time. No announcement. He sat at the long table and he asked her to walk him through the exhibition layout, and she did, standing beside him and describing each section with the same care she had brought to every translation. She watched his face. It was the same controlled face she had seen the first time, but there were moments, brief, unguarded, when something else came through. When she described the 1943 letter, the one about pride and grief being the same thing, she saw it. A small, involuntary movement in his jaw. She did not comment on it. She kept talking. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said in Italian, "My mother wrote letters like these. When we first came, she wrote them to her sister in Palermo, and her sister never answered, but she kept writing." He paused. "I threw them away after she died. I didn't think," he stopped. "I didn't think about what I was throwing away." Isabella said nothing. Some things did not need a response. Some things just needed to be allowed to be said out loud. "This is good work," Vincenzo said, and stood up and straightened his jacket. He looked at her with those dark eyes that were his son's eyes in an older face. "You're good at this." "Thank you," she said. He walked out. In the doorway he stopped and without turning around said, "My son has good judgment. He didn't used to, but he's gotten better." Then he walked out before she could decide what to do with that. She stood at the table for a long moment. Then she sat down and smiled at the wall, which was not something she generally did, but which felt in that specific moment like the only reasonable response. The opening was on a Saturday evening, and it was everything the planning had promised and more. The letters were displayed with their translations side by side, the originals in protective framing, the English versions on clean cards beneath them. Elena Moretti stood in front of her grandmother's handwriting for a long time with her hand over her mouth and her daughter beside her. Other families came with their own histories, their own letters brought from storage, their own grandmother's handwriting that they had been carrying without knowing what to do with it. Isabella moved through the room doing what she did, noticing, bridging, connecting the parts that needed connecting. She translated on the fly for 3 different conversations. She answered questions from a journalist covering the event for a cultural magazine. She helped an elderly man from Carroll Gardens read a wall plaque that was in Sicilian dialect and watched his face change when he understood it. Carla found her near the end of the evening and stood beside her and looked at the room. "Not bad," she said in Italian, which from Carla was a standing ovation. "Not bad," Isabella agreed. "My brother came," Carla said, meaning Vincenzo. "He stayed for 2 hours. He never stays for 2 hours." "I know," Isabella said. Carla looked at her sideways. "He told Matteo you were the right choice." Something warm moved through Isabella's chest. She did not let it show on her face, but she felt it entirely. "I'll try not to be insufferable about it," she said. Carla made the sound that was her laugh, sharp and fast and genuine. Then she walked away into the crowd. Matteo came to stand beside her at 9:20. The event was winding down. Staff were beginning the careful work of closing up. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her but not touching, and they both looked at the room and all the things in it that had not existed 2 months ago. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "I'm thinking about the woman in the 1943 letter," she said. "The one who wrote so that her daughter would have something to find when she remembered." She paused. "Her granddaughter read it tonight, and the granddaughter's daughter read it. The daughter said she didn't know her great-great-grandmother was funny." She paused again. "The woman wrote it in 1943, and it landed in 2024, and it still had her voice in it. She stopped. "That's what," he said quietly. "That's what it means to translate something without covering it up," she said. The woman kept her voice across 80 years and 2 generations and an ocean. She felt the sting of something at the back of her eyes, which she did not allow to become more than that. "I'm glad I was careful with it." Mateo was quiet beside her. Then, "I'm glad you were here for it." She turned to look at him. He was looking at her already with that plain, undefended face, the one that had no armor in it. "The FBI spoke to my father's attorney yesterday," he said. "Ferretti is cooperating. The investigation is narrowing toward him and away from the foundation." He paused. "It's not over, but the picture is becoming clearer." "Good," she said. "There's something else." She waited. The consulate offered a formal partnership, not just for the opening, an ongoing relationship, programming, archival access, joint events. He looked at the room. "They want you as the primary liaison on the cultural side." She stared at him. "The consulate, the Italian consulate of New York," he confirmed. She let that settle. She thought about the freelance contracts, the translation documents, the certification she had been pushing toward for 3 years. She thought about the restaurant and the uniform and the charcoal suit and the way the humiliation had settled into her bones that night like something she had learned to absorb. She thought about the card on her kitchen counter. She thought about Marco saying, "You were going anyway." She thought about Sophia saying, "Both things are true." "Yes," she said. "I haven't formally asked yet," he said. "Yes, anyway," she said. His almost smile arrived. The real version of it, the one that in most people would be a full open expression, but in him was exactly this, a small controlled movement that somehow communicated more than the loud version would have. "All right," he said. The room was almost empty now. The evening had done what evenings do, used up its time, and become something that would be remembered instead of lived. Isabella stood in the middle of it with the translations on the walls around her, and the feeling in her chest that she was finally, for the first time in years, in the right place. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "That first night," she said, "at the restaurant, when you said what you said to the man at table 7. She looked at him. "Did you already know who I was?" He was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, not too fast, not too slow, the quiet of someone deciding to be completely honest. "I had seen your portfolio," he said. "I had been looking for the right person for 3 months. Carla had sent me several candidates. None of them were right." He paused. "And then I came into that restaurant, and I watched you handle that man, and I watched you not break, and I watched you carry a full section without losing one piece of your competence or your dignity, and I thought..." He stopped. "What did you think?" she said. "I thought that's the person who understands what we're trying to preserve," he said. "Someone who knows how to hold something carefully even when the conditions are terrible." She looked at him for a long time, at the dark eyes and the jaw and the tattoo at his forearm, and all the things she had cataloged over weeks, and the thing underneath all of them, which was simply a person who had built something real and had wanted someone real to help carry it. "That's a lot of information to get from watching someone carry plates," she said. "You'd be surprised," he said, "what you can learn about a person from watching them under pressure." She looked at him, he looked back. The room was quiet. The Moretti letters were on the walls around them. Elena's grandmother's voice was in the air, preserved in ink and in care across 80 years. Isabella had come into this city with her grandmother's accent and her certifications and her plans, and the city had done what cities do. It had made her work for every inch of it, had made her prove herself in a uniform and a professional smile, and 6 years of holding things carefully under terrible conditions. And she had held them. She had not broken. She had not dropped any of it. She reached up and straightened the collar of his jacket, which did not need straightening, which they both knew, and he was very still. And she left her hand there for a moment against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, which was faster than his composure suggested. "The next time you want to tell me something," she said quietly, "just tell me." "I know," he said. "I mean it." I know," he said again, and covered her hand with his, and that was enough. That was the whole thing, the beginning of something that neither of them was going to manage quietly or carefully or without cost, and both of them knew it, and neither of them stepped back. 6 months later, the Romano Cultural Center opened its permanent home in a building in Carroll Gardens, 4 blocks from where Matteo's grandmother had lived for 60 years and spoken almost no English because she had never needed to. The opening drew a crowd that spilled out onto the sidewalk. The Italian consulate sent a representative. A journalist from a national magazine wrote about it as a model for living heritage preservation and quoted the cultural coordinator extensively and spelled her name correctly. Isabella Marino stood in the middle of the room she had helped build in the neighborhood where a woman had once written letters across an ocean, hoping someone would find them, and she was not surviving. She was not calculating the distance between where she was and where she was supposed to be going. She was not managing exhaustion or absorbing humiliation or pushing a dream into a future that kept moving away from her. She was simply here, in the right place, doing the right work, with the right people around her. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, that was exactly enough. And it was also in every way that mattered the beginning.